I've always said that Connecticut businesses are the envy of other states and other nations. That's why they recruit so heavily here, because we have phenomenal businesses. And let me throw IT Direct into that category too. You know, we just have unbelievable businesses here. And when I took over in late 2014, kind of my first public statement was Connecticut has enormous economic potential.
Hey, it's Ari Santiago, President, CEO of IT Direct. Welcome to another exciting episode of the Made in America podcast. Still doing our COVID-19 style editions, but I am very excited to expand that conversation. I've got with us today Joe Brennan, President and CEO of CBIA, the venerable Connecticut Business and Industry Association. I am super excited to have you on today, Joe. Longtime vet of the Connecticut economy, promoter, great individual, and I'm just super pleased. Thank you so much for coming on today, Joe.
Oh, Ari, it's absolutely my pleasure. It's great to be on your podcast. I follow it all the time, so it's great to be a part of it.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, listen, Joe, it's the Made in America podcast, so we start off with the same two questions. What do you make and why do you make it?
Well, what we make, hopefully, is make it easier for manufacturers to be successful here in Connecticut by working on policy, workforce, whatever it may be. And the reason I do it, I started out as a lobbyist on tax issues for CBIA 32 years ago and didn't know too much about manufacturing, never had worked in manufacturing. But boy, once I got to meet the people and learn about the ingenuity, the history about manufacturing in Connecticut, I was all in. So I just love being able to represent manufacturers at the state capitol, advocate on their behalf, speak all over the state about manufacturing, the importance of it to our economy, and just meet new people all the time. It's just fantastic, all those great products that get made here in Connecticut, and it's a huge part of our future.
Yeah, no doubt about that. So listen, it's one of the main theses and themes of the Made in America podcast, right, is really sharing the story of Connecticut manufacturing and why it's such a critical part of our present as well as our future. So I think, Joe, talking to manufacturers across the state, CBIA has a special place in most manufacturers' heart. It seems like it's the state-wide business organization. Not only did I mention the storied history, but also a great focus on manufacturing. Can you sort of talk a little bit about CBIA's relationship to manufacturing specifically and how it's been such a good relationship? Even though CBIA represents all businesses, why manufacturers have found such a friend and a big voice in CBIA?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ari. I think it really goes back to our roots. We started, believe it or not, back in 1815. A group of industrialists got together in Middletown, Connecticut, under the banner of the Connecticut Society for the Encouragement of American Manufacturing, and dealing with tariffs and the British dumping cheap goods here and making it difficult for Connecticut manufacturers to get started. And then through a lot of iterations and name changes and combinations with other groups, CBIA was born. So we go back over 200 years. But we started as a manufacturing organization, and then later on a statewide chamber merged with the Hartford County Manufacturers Association to form CBIA. So our roots are strong. And then it's just so evident from all the data on salaries, on multiplier effects, on how important it is to our economy. Manufacturers create more non-manufacturing jobs than other industries do. There's just so many support services that go into it. And then the other thing that's huge in a state like Connecticut, we're fortunate we're a small state, but we have some really prominent large OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, the Pratt & Whitneys, the Sikorskys, the Electric Boats, the Command Aircrafts, the Otises, the Stanley Black & Deckers. And all those companies just have major supply chains. So you have literally thousands of companies in Connecticut that support those big companies, small manufacturers. So that's really been the lifeblood. We talk a lot about being the insurance capital of the world, and certainly insurance, financial services, biomedical are all key parts of our economy. But I just look at manufacturing as the key driver of so many good things that happen in Connecticut.
Yeah, there's absolutely no question about that. So talk a little bit about this. What is it? When you're a manufacturer who's deciding about should I participate with CBIA or not, talk a little bit about why that. What does CBIA bring to the table that a manufacturer should really support?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's really two main things, and it kind of go both ways. We are the loudest voice. We have the most clout at the Capitol. We represent the largest number of manufacturers in Connecticut. So just supporting the effort. The larger we are, the more clout we have, the more effective we can be in representing manufacturers. So one way benefits us by getting them as a member, but also benefits them from getting the fruits of our labors. And then beyond that, just all the other products and services that we offer. We do free HR consulting to all members. We buy energy for a lot of companies, provide health insurance for smaller companies. There's just a whole range of products and services. And as you know, we partnered a couple years ago with Constep, which is the NIST MEP, the National Institute of Standards and Technology Manufacturing Extension Partnership affiliate here in Connecticut is Constep. They're part of CBIA now, and they have a whole range of products and services, or more services, that they deliver to small and mid-sized manufacturers to help make them more competitive. So yeah, I always felt if a manufacturer didn't get value out of CBIA, they weren't paying attention. There's a whole lot of value.
There's no question, and people that are in the audience and are fans of the podcast have certainly heard all manner of the people that have been on here. Zendex Tool, which we re-released a few weeks ago, which was sort of the podcast we were launching right as sort of COVID exploded, and so kind of got lost. We relaunched is just another example that's fresh in my mind of just here's a small Connecticut manufacturer, started in the 80s, get transitioned to the next generation, looking to step, take it to the next level, and boom, there's Constep coming in and helping them with lean, then CCAT to get equipment in robotics and laser welding, and really making a difference. And all of that made possible from the partnership through CBIA. So it's a great a powerhouse group, and I think those of us that are in manufacturing and supporting manufacturing really love to see that.
Yeah, it's been great. And, I just go down the roster of the people you've interviewed, Brian Montanari and Jill Mayer and Marietta Lee and Chris DiPentima and Chris Ulbrich and on and on and on. These are all people that are members of ours, many of whom served on our board or are currently serving on our board. It's great being in a relatively small state, just the relationships you build, the connectivity that you can provide. I'm sure we'll talk about the CMC, the Connecticut Manufacturing Collaborative, that we created a couple years ago, and just trying to, again, amplify the voice of manufacturers, raise up all these other regional organizations, their profiles, working with us and Constep. So just tons and tons of really good things.
So actually, I just want to take the opportunity to. Sorry, I'm an interrupter sometimes,
That's
Joe.
Okay.
I think you just wanted to jump back because you did bring up the CMC. It is somewhere I wanted to go. So let's just jump right there, because one of the things that we talked about, you and I offline, and that we've been talking about on the podcast too, is sort of the power of coming together. And I think the CMC, excuse me, I'm getting confused with the other CMMC. The CMC, I think, really exemplifies not only the power of being together, but the convening power of an organization like CBIA. So for the audience, if anyone doesn't know what the CMC is, if you give them a quick primer, and then why CBIA get involved and the value that it brings.
Sure. The CMC stands for the Connecticut Manufacturers Collaborative. And it started a couple years ago. And, the fact I'm retiring soon, as you know, I can speak freely now, maybe more freely than I otherwise would. But yeah, it was a lot of frustration for many, many years, not just recently, but many years, about a lot of smaller manufacturing groups around the state of Connecticut kind of fighting with one another, not trusting CBIA, thinking we were the 800-pound gorilla that wanted to steal their members. And it wasn't as functional as it should have been. So when Bonnie Del Conte, the president and CEO of Constep, reached out to me about combining our organizations, it got me thinking about how can we use the power of CBIA and Constep together to really make a difference for Connecticut manufacturers. So frankly, I came up with this idea about trying to convene all the different manufacturing groups around a table. If I said once, I said it 100 times, leave your association baggage at the door. And I had to go around and meet with some individuals that didn't trust us, that thought, what's CBA up to now? And, I was getting toward the end of my career. All I care about is progress. I don't care about plaudits or anything else. I just want to get stuff done. We're running out of time to get stuff done. So through a lot of work and a lot of conversations and a lot of just proving that we were sincere, that we had no ulterior motive here, we just wanted to help every manufacturer. And I keep saying to these guys that, if we make manufacturers successful in Connecticut, all our associations will benefit. So we've got 7 or 8 different associations, regional associations that all represent manufacturers sitting around a table. Eric Brown from our office has done a phenomenal job as kind of the administrator of that group. Bonnie Del Conte and the team from Constep are instrumental in making it successful. So, pre-COVID, we would have one large monthly meeting and then do a lot by email in between those monthly meetings. And then when COVID hit, we started a call every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday morning, just sharing information. And it's been, I think, incredibly helpful. Colin Cooper, I can't not mention Colin, the state's chief manufacturing officer, another former board member of ours and interviewee of yours, he's on every one of those calls. Having Colin inside state government has been huge. So yeah, this isn't, we represent all the large manufacturers also, but this is really designed more for the small and mid-sized guys and women out there that are, struggling to figure out their way through state government. About workforce, the number one issue obviously was workforce before the pandemic hit, trying to make sure companies have the skilled employees that they need in order to be successful. So we're just trying to cut through state government. We got a lot done. I mentioned Colin, the first initiative of the CMC was to create a chief manufacturing officer in state government. I'm not aware of any one of the other 49 states that has a CMO. I think we're the first and only in the country. And that was 100% the CMC, pushing that, working with people like Joan Hartley in the legislature and others to get that done. And it's been huge having Colin in that job. So that's just the beginning. We've only had, a little over a year and a half of being together. And I think the sky's the limit. Excuse me, the sky's the limit for the organization.
I love that, and I think it's a really unique power. We had David Griggs on from the Alliance a few weeks ago. I think we just released that podcast this week, actually, as we're talking.
It was great. I love David.
And he's wonderful, and he talked a lot about the convening power of groups. And I wonder, if I want to do a little bit of a retrospective. I think as you're coming to the end of your time at CBIA, I think it really would be helpful to get your perspective. But I'm going to do one more question before we kind of look back and talk a little bit about, what you're seeing right now that CBIA is doing related to the pandemic. I mean, look, there's an impact. There's no question about it. What is CBIA's role in helping people through the pandemic, and how do you see that?
Wow, I could talk the rest of the interview just on that. It's been, you hate the fact that it was a global pandemic that has cost so many lives that created this, but there was, I always look for silver lining inside those black clouds. And one of the silver linings, we've just seen how people came together and stepped up. And talking first specifically about our team, I've always thought of myself as, maybe a marginal manager at best. But, when I see how everybody rallied to the cause and stepped up and just outperformed in every way, shape, and form, new roles, whatever they could do, because we were just overwhelmed. Those first couple of days when people started realizing what was going on and businesses were shutting down or working from home, we just got just overwhelmed with inquiries from our members and non-members. And so it just kind of went in waves. Initially, it was like, geez, how can I keep this virus out of my workplace? And we would share CDC guidelines and other things and help them keep their places clean. And then it was like, okay, what if I have a COVID infection? How do I deal with that? And we would help them with that. A lot around workforce. What do we do? Do I furlough my people? Do I just lay them off so they can collect unemployment? How's that going to work? How does shared work work? The shared work program at Department of Labor work? Move from there onto the recovery programs. How do I get PPP? PPE, the other acronym PPE. How do I get masks and face shields and everything else that I need? Just kind of an ongoing just stream of questions that came in. And as I said, our team stepped up and responded to those. And then beyond that, doing webinars like a lot of other groups, we're not just trying to get out there with everybody else is doing. We're really looking at unique things. One of the first ones we did was with General Stanley McChrystal, which was great. He's been out, offering free services to groups like CBIA to talk about leadership during times of crisis. He headed up JSOC during the Afghan war and totally remade. It was in the book that you shared with me, Brave New Work. They talked about Stan McChrystal. So we did a webinar with him. I just did one earlier today, or at least introduced one with our other affiliate, ReadyCT, around remote learning. We tried to get, market that to parents and how am I going to deal with teaching my kids and what schools are going to look like in the fall. We had a great panel of experts talking about that. So just pumping out information. Working with David Lehman a lot around guidelines. I did serve on one of the governor's committees on reopening. So that was another way where we tried to get information out to people and help with companies getting through the pandemic. And final thing I'll say is just the reaction we have gotten has just been overwhelming. I've gotten so much goodwill for CBIA, I think, because of this. I think our future is bigger and better and brighter than ever. And we also opened it up to non-members. We're a membership organization, but we said, hey, we're in a time of crisis. If people need info on safety or cleaning, whatever it might be, we can't say, oh, are you a member? And send us a check and we'll send you information. So we opened it up to everybody. And we had people joining voluntarily, saying, I want to join you guys because I love what you're doing and I want to be part of it. So it's been, that's been a heartwarming part of it. Talking to Josh Jabal, the governor's chief operating officer, regularly with a bunch of our members, David Lehman, as I mentioned, Paul Mounds, the chief of staff, the governor directly has done webinars with us, board meetings with us. So it's just been, literally around the clock ever since it started. And
we'll tell you what, all this hard work, all this energy and effort, this like last final push, it's got to feel good as you're kind of coming to the end of your CBIA or transitioning to the end, right? Because you're not leaving, being a support role, transitioning. So maybe it feels good, kind of sprinting through that finish line.
I hope that came through in my voice there, Ari, and answering your question, because absolutely, it's been huge. Because, we've had our challenges. Connecticut is a tough state, as you and I have talked a lot about, trying to be as competitive as we need to be. And knowing I was going to be retiring at some point in the near future, and I was thinking a lot internally about what am I turning over? I took it an organization, way up here, and you always try to raise the bar a little bit. But we had some things that knocked us down a little bit. But coming through this, I really feel like the business community recognizes how important we are, not just through a pandemic, but, more importantly, how are we going to rebuild coming out of this pandemic? And I think people are going to be looking to CBIA to be a real leader there. We got phenomenal leadership coming into the organization. So like I said, I think our future as an organization is bright, and that definitely puts a little spring in my step as I'm racing toward the finish line here. But thank you for pointing that out.
So let me ask you this question. Looking back over your 32 years at CBIA, you've been through a lot in your time at CBIA. And if you look at sort of the economy and different things, right, we saw you went through the 1980s crash, the dot-com spring, the dot-com burst, the 9/11, the Great Recession. Of course, we just talked about the pandemic, and lots of stuff in between. I wonder if you could just reflect on what you've seen over this time and just what you've accomplished and experienced in your time at CBIA.
Yeah, going back to the very beginning, starting in the late of 1988, we had just an unbelievable recession back then. It was worse in Connecticut than many other places. Some of it because of Connecticut and changes we made, but some, the dot-com spring that you mentioned. So, things were relatively good. And I remember back when Governor Rowland was giving rebates, back to taxpayers because our surpluses were so large, right? And then 9/11 hit, and again, more traumatic here than many other areas outside of New York and Washington and Western Pennsylvania, just because of the impact on the financial markets and a large number of jobs in Connecticut. And we fought through that.
And the aerospace impact was
pretty severe. Aerospace impact was huge, you're right. But we came through that, and started gaining jobs back again. Then the Great Recession hit. And again, because that had such an impact on the financial markets, that was a deep, deep hit to Connecticut. And then that period after that, it wasn't like that recession back in the early 80s or early 90s. It was more like, are we ever going to see the end of this? It just went on for so long in Connecticut. Whereas the national economy, we've seen a real expansion in the national economy for quite a while, but we were really lagging behind. And, not here to point fingers or assess blame. I think we all have some ownership in that, maybe not being as forward thinking and proactive as we needed to be in earlier years. And there's a lot of complacency in Connecticut that has hurt us. But on the other hand, because I don't want to go on too long on your question, but the other thing that's really mindful to me is the resiliency the resiliency of businesses and business people in Connecticut, and the resiliency of people overall in Connecticut, the general public in Connecticut. We've had some real kicks in the teeth here over the years, and you highlighted, many of them. Not even meant getting to the pandemic and the impact that's having, but we keep fighting. We keep coming back, and yeah, we've lagged in a lot of indicators compared to other states, but we're here. We're here, and we're doing great work. You mentioned aerospace. I mentioned earlier about biomedical and insurance and financial services, and on and on and on. Just great businesses. I've always said that Connecticut businesses are the envy of other states and other nations. That's why they recruit so heavily here, because we have phenomenal businesses. And let me throw IT Direct into that category too. We just have unbelievable businesses here. And when I took over in late 2014, kind of my first public statement was Connecticut has enormous economic potential. And I still believe that. And we've started pre-pandemic, we started finally creeping up and getting a little closer to our peers and reaching that potential. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us, anybody involved in public policy and every resident of the state of Connecticut, is to make sure that we come out of this, not getting back to where we were, but getting back to better than we were. Because we've got so many great companies here that are doing research on vaccines and therapies for COVID that are going to be really busy. We got a lot of companies that can make PPE, and we'll continue to do that. Hopefully aerospace won't be hit too bad on the commercial side, because that's such a key part of our economy. But we still have, huge military work here too, and hopefully that'll continue. So I'm still optimistic, and sometimes it's hard. But in my job, I always felt if I couldn't maintain some measure of optimism, I shouldn't be in my job. That's part of my job.
You're going to bring up optimism, Joe, and I can't go through this whole podcast without sort of talking about the optimism. And this is really more probably for your successor, which I want to get to in a little bit. But I've expressed my feelings about optimism and the messaging. And what is the role, in your view, of messaging and what's CBIA's role in messaging, and what are your thoughts on how we should be messaging?
Yeah,
and now that you're on the way out, your thoughts, right? We don't need to balance other outside parties. What are your individual thoughts?
Yeah, this is honest. My thoughts are it's really hard. It's really hard, and there's no right or wrong. And you and I have talked at length about this, and one of the things I try to be is a good listener, and I have listened to you, and you're not the only one that's had the similar opinions. So we have really worked hard on our messaging. I think it's true what I've said to you in the past, that there's just a lot of policymakers in Connecticut that don't understand the economy, and they just think you have deep pockets and you can just throw more costs and mandates onto businesses all the time with no repercussions. So we have had to be tough in our rhetoric sometime and point out, if we were leading the country in job creation and economic growth, then yeah, maybe we can absorb some of those things. But numbers don't lie. And the numbers showed that we have lagged in economic growth and job creation. So be careful about what you're doing. And maybe sometimes we went a little too far in pointing out the negatives in order to make that point. And that's why, like I said, try to listen and hopefully we're trying different ways to get those messages across and accentuating some of the positive things, because we have so many positive things in Connecticut, but pointing out these things don't just happen by happenstance. And if we go too far, we're not going to have those good things. My predecessor, I remember him saying to me, we have a great quality of life here in Connecticut, but we're not going to be able to sustain it if we don't have economic growth. And that's just as true can be. So, messaging is always hard. Sometimes, I think I give my staff whiplash because one day I'll come in and say, we got to be more positive, and the next day I'll come in and say, well, this happened and we got to be tough, so, and part of that's listening too, because we have such a broad membership. I hear from all different parties. So, yeah, I think finding that, sweet spot about how you can get your message across, but not be too negative or sound like you're oblivious to the problems and just be too much of a cheerleader. That's not our job. We're not hired to be cheerleaders. We're hired to be advocates for the private sector in Connecticut. And sometimes you got to be tough with your language in doing that. But
where's CBIA's role from a communication standpoint, and maybe from a planning standpoint, because again, I think this is where we've I won't say battled, but we've had conversations. It is about, whose job is it to set a path forward? It's not always just about, do we just Pollyanna-ishly talk about, I don't know if that's a word, but I'm going to say it is, Pollyanna-ishly talk about, there you go, stamped, talk about all the good things that are happening, nor I think is there something that says, oh, we should all just, hammer on the bad things. But whose job is it, Joe, to set the path that isn't talking about what's good or bad of today, but sets a stake out in the future and says, this is where we can go, and here's the things we need to do to get there? Is that CBIA's role?
Yeah, I think it is now. I don't know that we always thought of that as our role. A few years ago, we started a campaign called 20 by 17, which was exactly that. It was to try to get in the top 20 of these national rankings, where we were getting the crap kicked out of us because we were 46th and 47th in really key measures. And so the plan was by the year 2017 to be in the top 20 of those measures. So it was a forward-looking thing. We did not put enough weight behind it, enough resources behind it, and I'll take ownership for that. But I don't think it's certainly exclusively CBIA's role to do that. I think a lot of people, a lot of organizations, almost everybody should be pushing in that direction. So yeah, we clearly have a role there. And one of the things I've been trying to move closer to in the last few years is being the head of the organization, was looking at ourselves a little bit more directly in the economic development realm, because we always looked at ourselves as policy advocates, and economic development was left to others. And I think, frankly, and again, speaking frankly now, that Connecticut had a void there. We weren't doing a good job on messaging, and we weren't doing as good a job as we needed to on economic development. Some of that was just kind of bailing water out of the boat. We were just writing big checks to companies to keep them here, but that's not a sustainable economic development strategy. So I felt, what can CBIA's role be? And that's around the 20 by 17 and some other things, trying to talk more about future and not just opposing this bill or supporting that bill. Now, I feel more confident now. You mentioned David earlier, David Griggs, who I think is just phenomenal, doing what he does as an economic developer. So I don't want to get into David's space, but I want to cooperate with David and work in partnership with David to advance the cause. And then with David Lehman, who I have utmost respect for on the state level, and all the other organizations out there working on economic development, we just need a mind reset. We've just gotten bogged down in a lot of the same old battles that we always fought. And I said to our team, if our agenda in the 2021 legislative session looks like every other year, well, I won't be around to fire him anymore, but I may encourage a new person to get rid of him, because we can't just go back to the same old, same old. We've got to be more forward looking. How can we, I know I'm going on too long here, just a final thing real quick, and then you can interrupt me again. We looked at, there's a certain amount of arrogance in Connecticut too, okay? That we look down our nose, some people do, down our nose, policymakers do, at other states, especially in the South. There's states in the South that are eating our lunch when it comes to technology and innovation and logistics and transport, all these different things. They truly are the land of steady habits. And we got to break through that. I haven't done a good enough job articulating that, and I'll take ownership of that. But I think going forward, we're going to have the ability to kind of take a second look coming out of this pandemic and be more effective going forward.
I'm going to challenge that land of steady. I think we give ourselves an excuse by just saying, well, land of steady habits, New England, blah, blah, blah. I think, you look at anyone that's had historical success, and it's not just in government or in places that you live, but it's in businesses too. And, you and I know can both run through the list of businesses that had huge long-term success track records that struggled. General Electric, going through right now. And it just seems that if you've had a long track record of success, sometimes you stop looking at what you can do to continue to lead and get a defensive posture. But I do agree with you, regardless of the rationale of what Connecticut got there. And I think that we did get there, and it is important to lead in a new way and to get back to our roots, right? Our roots of innovation. You talked about, I can't remember the exact name of what the 1812 origin of CBIA was, but like here they are, a group of industrialists getting together and saying, we need to work together to offset an outside party. And that group, that togetherness, is what I think helps people to be better. It's the second goal of the Made in America podcast, right? To bring people together to help learn, because together we'll be better. And I think when I look at CBIA and Concept coming together, the CMC, and me being out there interviewing all these business leaders, there is a change. Everyone that's leading these organizations is a new face, and in many, many cases, a new generation bringing new energy and a togetherness that you've been a part of. And I think I want to talk about that future and pivot to that. And maybe we can start that by breaking some news now. And maybe let's talk about, who are you handing the reins to, and what makes you excited about that?
We're handing the reins to a gentleman by the name of Chris DiPentima. And Chris currently works for Pegasus Manufacturing, which is now owned by Leggett & Platt, a global manufacturer. And Chris, I've known for, probably 8 or 10 years. He came on our board, worked his way up. He was tabbed by my predecessor to be an officer of CBIA, and then became a chair of CBIA a couple years ago. So he's just a phenomenal individual. You know him well. He's really, really bright. He's an attorney by background, really, really smart. I like the fact that I think he's like me in one sense, that he's unflappable. I've never seen him get angry. He just is got a, even disposition, which I think is important in a job like mine. He's got both the small business and large business perspective, which is not a lot of people have, but given the fact he was at Pegasus and then now part of Leggett & Platt. Although his background's in manufacturing, he understands the big picture, that being the head of CBIA, you're not just representing manufacturers, but all businesses, all industries in the state. I've walked the floor with him at Pegasus, so I see the interaction with his colleagues there, which was a critical factor for me, knowing the culture of CBIA and the importance of teamwork. So when I saw how Chris interacted with his team and how his team interacted with him, that really made me feel good that he's the right person at the right time. And because he's got that engineering background, which, if there's one thing I could do over in my life was to try to become an engineer, because I just am blown away by a lot of those names I mentioned earlier, just the engineering background and how you look at problems, how you analyze things, how you can restructure an organization. I just think he's going to bring CBIA to a whole new level, just a whole new level. And I couldn't be more excited that he's going to be the person in charge, and that I'm going to be able to hang on for a few months, helping him through the transition and just getting acclimated, because it's a different model for us. We've always promoted from within for many, many decades, and had public policy people running CBIA. And he doesn't have that same background, but the fact he chaired our board, he chaired the aerospace components manufacturers, he was the first and only chair of the Connecticut Manufacturers Collaborative. He certainly has been engaged in public policy, but I want to help him in any way I can to be successful.
Thinking about your background and knowing him as you do, and seeing, you've got a really unique view because you've been through so much with CBI and the Connecticut business. What do you see as some of the great opportunities for Chris to be able to leverage to maybe achieve some of those great goals? You said the 20 by 17, I love that approach, and I think setting something out and going for it. What do you think are some opportunities for Chris?
Well, I think the timing is critical here because, I don't want to overstate the impact that the pandemic will have on our economy going forward, because we don't know right now, but, with more remote work, with companies struggling, with employees, maybe working different schedules because schools aren't going to be on the same schedules and daycare has been disrupted. How are we going to remake our economy? A lot of the large companies, as I mentioned earlier, we've got a lot of large global headquarters here for financial services and insurance. And when I talk to those CEOs, they're going to be shrinking their footprints globally, over time. They understand how effective remote work can be. How's that going to affect our economy? How's, at least short term, the impact on commercial aircraft or aerospace manufacturing going to be? So I think the timing is just critical here to take a lead role for CBIA, not just reacting to policy choices that legislators may throw out there that'll be problematic for us, but take the reins and work with CEOs of the largest companies down to the owners of really small businesses and figure out what the path forward is. I wish I could be more specific right now on what those opportunities are going to be, but I'm still trying to figure it out myself. But I do think leveraging the assets that we have greater than we have been in the past, particularly around advanced manufacturing and those other industries that I mentioned. More to come on that, and I'll come back as a senior advisor at some point. Let you know how it's all going.
I love to hear that, and I think I told you I was going to get to our rapid fire round of questions, and before I do, I just wonder if maybe if you could, I'm sure you will give him directly, but just for the audience, what's kind of, if you were going to give Chris, one great piece of sage advice on your experience that would help propel him, to success and drive the mission of CBIA forward, what's that kind of key piece of advice you think you'd share with him?
Wow, well, I don't know, this maybe isn't the most important, but for somebody that's relatively new in some ways coming in, you got to spend the time building relationships. You can't sit in your office and do great work. You got to get out. You got to speak. You got to, going to say press the flesh. We don't do that anymore, but you got to get out and meet people. Policy people, key legislators, key administrators, certainly the governor and his folks, but business leaders from across the state, the head of all these other business associations, chambers of commerce that we talked about, economic development officials. We have such a great team at CBIA that it'll allow him to do that, because that's what I spent a lot of my time doing. And I could do that because we have such a phenomenal team there. But I just can't stress enough the importance of getting out and building those relationships. Because if any success that I have had, it's not that I'm any smarter or work harder than anybody else, but I just think I've done a good job of forming really good relationships with people. And I know Chris personally, so he will do a great job at that. So he'll be very successful.
There's no doubt about that, right? All things get done through people, and so getting those relationships is going to be critical. Sage advice, Joe. It's been awesome having you on, but let's go to rapid fire round of questions, and then we'll get this thing wrapped up. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, here we go. There are right or wrong answers. We'll see how you do. All right, Red Sox or Yankees?
Born and raised in New York, so longtime Yankee fan. Sorry.
Oh, we're already starting off on the wrong foot, Joe. Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts?
I'm not a coffee drinker, but I like donuts, so I'll go with Dunkin'.
All right, well, listen, outside of the pandemic, when you travel, staycation or take time off? Staycation or exotic destination?
Well, we usually travel someplace. I don't know how exotic, but I have been to Nicaragua, gone to Ireland 3 times now, just had to cancel a trip there. So as I get older, I'm trying to get a little bit more exotic.
There you go. You'll have time to do that now.
Yep.
iPhone or Android?
iPhone.
Sports car or SUV?
Right now, SUV in my dream sports car.
So this question is going to be odd given where you are in your career, but we'll ask it anyway. If you could do anything and had to, but you could be anything, what would you do or what would you be other than President CEO of CBIA?
Oh, is that now?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Because growing up, I always said, and you'll hate this answer more than my earlier answer, I always wanted to be center fielder for the Yankees. That's the only thing I ever wanted to do. And maybe I'm a little bit too old for that now, but
that's
other
right.
than that, work, I don't want to sound
Yankees.
Patronizing, and it's not just because of the timing, but one of the things I have talked to others about is I'd love to do something in Hartford around race relations, because I wasn't able to talk about our work at Hartford High School with the Academy or former Academy of Engineering and Green Technology there, but these, I'm sorry, this is not rapid fire. I'll save it for another time.
All right, well, I'll ask you about that at the end. What about favorite business book? You got one?
Well, I'm not trying to suck up here, Ari, but Brave New Work, I really enjoyed that because it kind of blew everything up and changed my thinking. I wish I was younger when I read it, but I really enjoyed that book. So thanks for sharing.
Nice. What's one thing, Joe, that you learned early in your career, early in your life, that's helped propel you to the success that you've had?
Oh boy, I'm afraid I already stepped on this one, Ari, but relationship building. Being a lobbyist, you're in a relationship business, and I always laugh with my wife. I always say to her, she doesn't like this, but I always say I'm a type B living in a type A world. But being a lobbyist at the Capitol and dealing with people and high-powered business people, I really had to work hard on relationship building, and I think that's been really important for me.
What's something, Joe, that you learned later in your life or later in your career that if you went back and told young Joe when he listened to you, you think would have been really beneficial to him in his life and career?
That's an easy one, Ari. I really struggled, I called it lack of confidence when I was younger. When I took over at CBI, I met with a coach and did a lot of psychological testing. And he said, you're very confident in yourself. What you have is a high level of self-consciousness. You worry too much about what other people think. So I wish I did that. Chris, who we talked about earlier, gave me a book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Bleep, which helped me get through that a little bit. So once I stopped worrying about what other people thought and did what my gut told me was right, then I achieved more success. But I wish I did that much earlier in my career.
That's a great lesson. Well, Joe, we've talked about a whole bunch of stuff today. It's been great having you on. I think you wanted to share one more thing about the work at Hartford High School. And I think, listen, we were talking about the pandemic, but there is this whole issue with race that's going on right now. Certainly, the George Floyd thing brings that to the front and center. So please, share that. I think that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, I'll try to do as quickly as possible. CBIA for over a decade now has been involved with Hartford High School, which was originally a separate academy on engineering and green technology. Now it's a career pathway there, and we do that through our partner Ready CT that I mentioned earlier. So I've had just phenomenal opportunities to work with these kids. They've built wind-powered solar turbines to be put up in Nepal, upper Himalayas, to give power to villages that never had it before. And these are all kids of color. Most generation after generation of poverty in their families. And these kids are phenomenal. What they're accomplishing because they're getting proper guidance from people in the private sector, innovative administrators and educators in the system that were helping them. And it just kind of drove home that we have just kind of written off generation after generation of really talented people because of our society. We have this large concentrations in most major cities of people of color that are poor. And, with all the trillions of dollars over decades that we pumped in, we haven't solved that problem yet. And why should these kids be disadvantaged when they can cure cancer and do other great things, and my kids have the opportunities that they have? So, and I've had these conversations with others, well before the current time, but, my small voice, how I can maybe spend some of my free time in trying to help these kids, and more importantly, try to get people to understand the value that they provide. We provide internships with them during the summers, and the employers that take high school interns, not college interns, but high school interns, are blown away by what these kids can accomplish. And it's heartwarming and heartbreaking at the same time. So if I have a little bit of time to give, or a little bit of thought or expertise or sweat equity, whatever it may be, that's one thing I'd like to pursue a little bit.
Well, I'll tell you what, Joe, I've always been a big believer that we can't guarantee equal outcomes, because we're not going to always get equal effort. But one thing we should be able to guarantee is equal opportunity.
Absolutely.
And I think that would be a tremendous thing for you to do, tremendous legacy to leave behind. And, I'm always here to help you in any way I can. And that's another endeavor you can count on my support in. So thanks so much, Joe, for coming on, being a guest on Made in America podcast. Thank you so much for what you've done for Connecticut business, over the last 3 decades. I know you're going to be a great help to Chris in his transition. I personally think you've made and helped the board make a great selection going forward. And your legacy is not just going to be all the great stuff that you've done in the past, but will also be, the legacy of the way that you've handed this over. And I super appreciate it. So on behalf of myself, the other Made in America podcast listeners, and really business in Connecticut, thank you very much.
Well, that's very, very kind of you to say, Ari. It's been an absolute joy, pleasure for me, but I can say that this is the pinnacle of my career, finally making it to the Made in America podcast. So I could retire happy now.
There you go. The crowning achievement. Thanks so much, Joe. We'll talk soon.
This was great. Thanks for having me on.
Made in America with Ari Santiago is brought to you by IT Direct.
As always, thanks so much for tuning in. I definitely want your feedback and hope you subscribe. But what I want the most is to build a community where we learn and grow with each other. I hope you're getting a lot of value out of the time we're spending together. Thanks so much for listening. I'll see you next time.